Hey guys, we're going to cover abortion in this digital lecture, digital video lecture. One of the things I guess I want to start by saying is that I understand how controversial a topic this is, which is one of the reasons why it's extremely important to me that it's covered in ethics, that I want people to at least have thought about abortion at some point in their lives. Because I know that at some point we may know someone who is making this decision, the decision to have an abortion, or we may be asked to vote on the legality of abortion. Regardless of how we feel about it right now, we need to at least think about the logic of abortion and the abortion legality in the United States today. These next two slides that I have for you cover some statistics concerning abortion and the women who choose to have an abortion. To me, the statistics are quite important in this debate. Usually I don't like to talk statistics in an ethics class because I'm a firm believer that democracy does not equate to morality. Just because everyone believes that it's true, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's true or right or good or moral. But I think in the abortion discussion, it's extremely important to discuss the statistics, especially when you're looking at the numbers and you can see that there are truths that we can find in these statistics, as you can see in this slide, and you'll see in the next slide as well. For the most part, it is very young women who are making these decisions, the decision to have an abortion. We're talking women in their 20s, teens as well. We're also talking about economically disadvantaged women who are making this decision as well. So as you can see on this slide right here, we have the 69% of women who commit an abortion or have an abortion are economically disadvantaged. We also have 45%, that's in the next slide, 45% of women who make this decision, the decision to have an abortion, are not married and are not cohabitating. 51%, that's in the next slide, 51% of women who have an abortion were contracepting at the time that they conceived. So I obviously do not know these women personally, these women in the statistics, but at the same time, I'm wondering, or my question, I guess, for you to think about is, what kind of picture do these statistics paint? Are we talking about college students who are maybe having relationships that are more loose than married couples or cohabitating couples? Are we talking about disadvantaged women who maybe don't know better or being taken advantage of or aren't educated about the consequences of certain sexual activity? Are we talking about teenagers? What are we talking about? It seems like it appears that the women who need, education and support and respect the most are the women who are being put in this situation to make this decision concerning abortion. Like I said, young women, women who are not married, women who are economically disadvantaged. These seem to be the people who are having abortions. And I don't really want to talk about the biology of an abortion or what exactly happens in the process. And it's very simple to look up. But I will say will be the one comment that I do make, I guess, before I move on to the ethics and the ethics of the discussion, is that an abortion can be a dangerous procedure if it's not done properly. If you don't receive the proper care, or if you're not in the proper facility with a doctor who is closely monitoring what's going on, fertility can be affected, future fertility. So a woman may have an abortion without ever knowing that she may be infertile because of the procedure later. Young teenagers may have an abortion without really knowing the severity of what they're doing. Those are important things to remember when we're discussing this. I am not a doctor. I'm not an MD. So I will not speak to the statistics of the dangers of abortion, but they are present, just like any medical procedure. But I do want to bring that to light, that there are some dangers, and especially when we're talking about teenagers or economically disadvantaged women who may not be as educated concerning the dangers. That, to me, that's a problem. I think that, teenagers need to be better informed. Economically disadvantaged women also need to be better informed as well. About what the decision that they're making for their bodies. I also want to admit to you guys that I am well aware that O'Keefe is quite emotionless when he is discussing the issue of abortion. And I mean, part of it is the topic or the class, the course, it's ethics. So really, ethics should not be approached with any sort of emotivism or, emotional arguments. But at the same time, you also do need to remember that there is some sort of sensitivity that you need when you're covering topics like this, because these are sensitive abortion is a sensitive topic, and I understand that. I understand that it's a charged topic. I also want to make sure that I'm clear about the difference between an abortion versus a direct abortion versus some sort of situation that is of medical necessity. So as you guys already know from the foundation of this course, that the ends do not justify the means, that I cannot do something that is evil of itself with a good intention, that I do not have that ethical or moral right. When we are talking about abortion, I will use O'Keefe's definition, which is the direct expulsion of a fetus from a mother's body into an environment in which it cannot survive, and or the destruction of a fetus within the mother's body. I want to make sure that I'm clear that the destruction or the removal of the fetus in terms of abortion is intended of itself or as a means to an end. When we're talking about abortion on an ethical level, the decision to remove the fetus is of itself intended either directly or as a means to an end to some other goal. Please recall the principle of double effect, that let's pretend that I have some sort of cancer, and I happen to be pregnant. It is not an abortion if I decide to move forward with radiation or chemotherapy, and it happens to bring about the destruction of the fetus. That is not an abortion. At that moment, I am intending life-saving care for myself, because if I don't live, the fetus will not live either. So in that situation, the principle of double effect applies, which means that the action itself is that the abortion itself or the removal of the fetus itself is foreseen but unintended. I don't intend to withhold the life of my fetus, but at the same time, if I don't make the decision to have chemotherapy, I will die. Now, this is a really difficult example to give, medically speaking, because I personally know that there are situations where a woman can decide to wait on chemotherapy, that the doctor will say something along the lines of, we can wait a couple of months until you have the child and then start chemotherapy. So, I mean, I know that there's a gray area there where the doctor can tell you, we can wait, until you have the child, and then we can go forward with chemotherapy. Sorry. But there's nothing inherently evil or more ethically speaking about going forward with chemotherapy, because any sort of damage that it does to the fetus is foreseen and unintended. So the principle of double effect does apply in some situations. When we are talking about the ethics of abortion, I want to make sure that I'm clear that we are talking about the direct intended removal of the fetus, that this is something that is directly intended of itself for itself. So again, I'm going to just go through the way that I have this set up is, and you'll see pretty clearly on the slides that I have, that I'm just going to go through line by line O'Keefe's arguments concerning abortion. And what I do is I outline the arguments that he provides, and then I will provide some commentary concerning his what I call pro-life arguments. So the first one that, I haven't heard this recently, but not directly anyway. I've heard this. The first argument that O'Keefe presents is the fetus is not a person; it is a parasite, a clump of cells with no rights. I haven't heard that exact language recently. It used to be a bigger issue, maybe 10 years ago, but at this point, I haven't really heard many people call a fetus a parasite. I will say that I did hear last year some political candidates making commentary concerning whether or not a fetus has constitutional protection and rights. And I mean, this isn't calling out any particular candidate or any particular politician, because I've heard many of them say it. It's not just one person. I've heard many people say, look, if it doesn't have a Social Security card, then it doesn't have constitutional protection, which is a little problematic, or extremely problematic for me. That your belonging to the United States legally really does not have any direct effect on your value. So regardless of where you are, who you are, what you look like, what nationality you are, how powerful or how weak you are, your human dignity remains the same. And I'm going to go back to these things that I told you that I will keep going back to over and over when we're talking about life issues. These three truths that I apply to life issues in every situation. The importance of human relationality, human life as inherently valuable, and human life as an obligation. We have a purpose and a nature that we did not create. And so I apply this here as well, that look, in terms of people who are fetuses who are unborn, or people who do not have Social Security cards, human life is inherently valuable. So we can't really have this argument about whether or not it has protection under the law or the Constitution. That the law and the Constitution doesn't always determine morality, as we've seen in situations in the past. I like to go back to World War II and what was legal in Germany in the 40s. Just because it was legal, obviously it wasn't moral. So the legality or the protection under the law really does not say much about this issue, and it shouldn't be the determining factor in this issue. So it can be, I guess, I understand that can be frustrating to hear or to think about, but at the same time, I mean, we must look at the logic of the issue. Biologically speaking, I know some of you can probably give me better answers to this, but if you're a medical student or pre-med student, you should know that, after the moment of conception, the DNA that's necessary for human development is present. Stem cells are present. They can become any organ necessary for human life. And I also know that the fetus itself is its own entity. So, this actually goes into number 2 as well, that O'Keefe outlines. The fetus may be a human being, but it's not a person. It has no state-sanctioned rights. I'm really responding to these first few arguments with this commentary, that just because something does not have state-sanctioned rights, that does not remove its inherent value. So human life is inherently valuable. And if this is some sort of human life or some sort of developmental stage of human life, then we must treat it as inherently valuable. So this may be a point of contention. So this will I guess come into play in the last slide where I go over the assignment. But so just keep listening. Give me a minute. I understand this may be a point of contention, that if it is some sort of human life or a developmental stage of human life, it is inherently valuable because it is human life. So I want to go back, I guess, to the question of who or what is the source of human rights. So again, look at number 1, look at number 2, that the fetus has been called a clump of cells with no rights. The fetus has been called, a thing or human that has no state-sanctioned rights. Therefore, we can do what we want with it. Really, the author of human rights is human nature itself, or natural law. So natural law is above us and above any government because it comes from human nature itself. So it flows forth from human nature itself. Therefore, if these creatures or a fetus participates in human nature, then it is protected under natural law. And like I said, I understand this may be a point of contention. I will give you a chance to respond to me. That's part of your assignment at the end. But that is the logical response to the issue of, it's a clump of cells with no rights and it has no state-sanctioned rights. The next one that O'Keefe raises is the fetus is an aggressor against the life of the mother, either physically or emotionally. When we're talking about an aggressor, O'Keefe points out that the agent, if someone is an aggressor, or if something is an aggressor, then it is an unjust aggressor. It is unjustly taking action against, a human being or a person. And it is harming a human being or a person unjustly. In this situation, it's really difficult to make that argument that the fetus is an unjust aggressor, because for the most part, that a fetus is conceived on purpose. When, you know how a fetus is conceived. There's really no accident there. That it's not something that you did not choose. You chose sexual activity. Therefore, the fetus is not unjust because it came from your own actions. I understand that this here, what I just said, that you could think to yourself, wait a second, what about rape? That was unjust. Absolutely. I completely agree with you that in the case of rape, the woman did not make the decision to engage in sexual activity. And that is severe. It is serious. It's not something that I take lightly. And I hope that you know that. But at the same time, the fetus was not the origin of the rape. The fetus did not cause that. The fetus may be a reminder of it, but the fetus, logically, is not the origin of it. And I know what I'm saying sounds harsh, and I know that what I'm saying sounds like I don't respect what a woman went through when she was raped. And I hope that that's not how you feel, and I hope that's not how it came across, and I hope that you know me better than that. I absolutely take serious issue with rape, and it's not fair, and it should never happen. In a culture where men respect women, it would never happen. But at the same time, it's illogical to think that a person B would suffer for the crime of his or her father. So we don't put people in prison, or we don't give people capital punishment because someone else committed a crime. We don't do that in our culture, or we shouldn't do that in our culture. We shouldn't do that, logically speaking. But with abortion, from rape, because of rape, that's essentially what's happening, is that the fetus is paying for the crime of the father. And again, like I said, I know that can be quite harsh, but at the same time, it's important to think about that does the fetus have the right to not pay for the crime of someone else? And I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying that, I have the right to demand something from a woman who's been raped, demand the life of the fetus. But at the same time, it's something to think about regarding rape, and, the fetus is not the origin of the rape, and the fetus did not commit the crime. The fetus is a byproduct of the crime, and the fetus did not have anything to do with it. So the next argument, even if the fetus is not classified as an aggressor, there is a clash of rights, and the rights of the mother are paramount. I don't know if anyone would actually logically argue this at this point in our culture. I think that at the time when O'Keefe was writing this, that this was a popular belief system, that the rights of the powerful prevail over the rights of the weaker. And really, that's not really something that I hear anymore, logically speaking, and I'm glad that we've moved on from this sort of thinking. That really the location of the person does not matter. The location of the agent does not matter regarding dignity and the demand of rights. So like I said, any human being that has that is in any developmental stage, does not matter the location of the person, that person has rights. And I know that I'm calling the fetus a person, and I want to be careful with that, and I want to make sure I'm clear with that distinction, fetus as person. But at the same time, if you truly believe that this is some sort of developmental stage of human life, then this fetus has the right to all of the rights that you and I have, the right to life, that sort of thing. So we can't really treat the weaker as that which does not have rights, because it simply is not the case. Because we do not behave that way, we should not behave that way, that the weaker do not lose their rights simply because they are weak, that the powerful do not have rights simply because they are powerful. That is not authentic, that is not moral, that is not ethical. The rights of the mother in this situation are not paramount. It is equally important. The life of the mother is equally important as the life of the fetus. The next question, the fetus is unwanted, thus its life has no value. Like I said, I haven't heard many people say this recently, But at the same time, I believe that a lot of people believe this deep down, that what kind of life would this child, this fetus have, or this child have because I don't want it? What kind of life would it have because I don't want it? It's interesting that, someone makes this argument. The life of the fetus is not really based, the right to life is not based on whether or not someone wants something. Your right to live is not based on how much you are valued by society or by your friends or by your family. The same thing with the fetus. The right of the fetus to live is not based on whether or not you want it. Your desire for the fetus or your desire to not have the fetus really doesn't change the truth of the matter, or really doesn't change the truth of the issue. That the way that you feel about something doesn't determine its value. That is emotive ethics or emotivism. There is very little or no logic in the belief that value is based on opinion or based on how I feel about something. That simply is not true. Regardless of how I feel about something, the inherent value is still there. And that really what's really important to remember about abortion is that the sexual act is prior to the decision to having an abortion. And so part of the responsibility that we have as adults and human beings is that we have a responsibility to use our sexuality appropriately, and to remember that when I am engaging in sexual activity, that there may be a fetus that results from this, and remember, I have an obligation to that fetus that I am, participating in creating. Now, obviously, rape is another issue, but really, I have a responsibility for my actions, and that I don't have a right to sexual activity. That I need to remember, even in my relationships and my sexual activity, that this may happen, even if, as it said, go back to the statistics, that 51% of people who were contracepting when they conceived, even if I'm, making the decision to contracept, this may happen, and I have an obligation that comes with this. So really, abortion points to a deeper issue. It seems to me that the abortion issue in the United States points to the fact that Americans seem to desire sexual activity without any sort of consequences. And that simply is not true of the sexual act itself. That the sexual act itself is inherently tied to biological consequences. And that's something to think about as we move forward, especially because we will be discussing sexual ethics next week. Remember that, the human beings are not owed the right to sexual activity. And I know our culture tells us something different. I understand that our culture tells us something that is very different than that. Our culture tells us that we have the right to do what we want, sexually speaking, and that there should be no consequences, that sex should be free, no consequences. And that simply is not the case. Emotionally, physically, there are inherent consequences that come with the act, and we have the obligation to remember that. And now I am moving to the next issues that O'Keefe outlines when covering abortion. The last two issues are my own additions. Number 11 and 12 were things that I added, issues that I added over the years as I was teaching this topic. And so we'll get there. But at number 6, the fetus has a medical condition that will lead to a human being with medical or physical issues. I don't know how careful we want to be in our culture, I guess, or how careful we want to be logically speaking. I've already argued with you, or debated with you, or we've already covered the fact that human life is inherently valuable, and that there really is nothing that removes the value of the person. And go back to capital punishment. Regarding capital punishment, even in the situation of a crime, even in this terrible, disgusting crime that was committed, a person still has the basic rights of a person and should not be, logically speaking, we don't have the right to kill someone if we can safely keep them contained and keep them away from the rest of society, and we can protect the rest of society. So logically speaking, there really is nothing that we can say, or no issue that can arise that can remove the dignity of the person. Especially medical conditions or medical and physical issues. They're really, people who have any sort of medical issue, that doesn't mean that their dignity or their value is weakened on any level whatsoever. Honestly, every single person who exists, no one is perfect. That every person has something that they struggle with, something that they overcome. Any sort of medical, physical, emotional, we all struggle. Everyone is different. That doesn't change the inherent value of each person. I think that this question may be problematic because I can understand why parents might say, or why parents might argue, I don't have time to take care of a child that has mental disabilities. I don't have time to take care of that. I don't want that in my child. And I think that's a serious statement to make, and that can be a big problem. I know personally of 3 children that I've interacted with, or 3 teenagers that I've interacted with, who over my the course of my years of teaching, whose parents were told that their children, that there was something severely wrong with them in utero, and that if they were born, they either would not live, or if they did live, they would have severe mental disabilities. And that simply is not true. That these people are the most, brilliant, loving, kind, generous, intelligent people that I've ever met, and I've ever had the privilege of working with. And it terrifies me to think that their parents may have removed their lives because of a mistake that a doctor made. I'm not saying that, doctors are wrong. They absolutely are correct many, many times. But statistically speaking, there are situations where doctors are wrong about whatever it is, the prognosis or the situation that they're discussing. And it concerns me that someone would be so careless with the life of a fetus, because the doctor could be wrong. And there have been doctors who have been, incorrect about these issues. So when we're moving forward talking about the fetus and a medical condition, number one, we need to recognize that this is not always true all the time, that this is a mistake. We can't treat this fetus's life carelessly because of a mistake that may have been made, medically speaking. But also, even if the doctor is correct, and even if there is some sort of medical condition or a physical, emotional condition that this child or the fetus will have, it doesn't change the inherent value of the person. We would never consider, or I hope we would never consider euthanizing a 3-year-old child or a 3-year-old toddler based on some sort of disability or problem that this child develops. And I would hope that we would not do that. Why would we extend that to the womb? So if we're not going to euthanize a 3-year-old toddler because of some sort of medical disability that he or she develops, why would we euthanize them in the womb? Now, this brings us to a serious issue that's happening right now in the case of euthanasia, that there are children right now being euthanized in Europe, their parents are electing to euthanize them because of a medical issue that they don't want to take, the parents can't handle anymore. We'll talk about that when we get to euthanasia in a couple of days, but this is a serious issue, and that if we're comfortable euthanizing a 3-year-old or a 12-year-old, which happened recently in Europe, we obviously will be comfortable euthanizing a fetus that demonstrates some sort of medical condition. So that seems to be that there is this inherent loss of value for human life itself, just generally speaking. Number 7, the woman has an inalienable right to what happens to her body. I'm going to go back to that argument that I made in the previous slide concerning the inalienable right of what happens to your body. That decision was made when you decided to engage in sexual activity. And I know that's harsh. I know what I'm saying. I understand that. And like I said, I hope that you know me well enough to understand that I'm trying to approach this logically rather than emotionally. And it's important that we approach this logically. That really, I don't have the right to what happens to my body if I made the decision to act in a way that brought about the life of a fetus. So my rights are not absolute and they're not completely autonomous. My rights are intricately related to other human beings. So my rights exist with the obligation to give others the same rights that I am owed. So when someone says something about, I have a right to do this, or I have a right to this, you need to remember that your rights are not absolute. That rights exist because we have an obligation to others. So I have a right because I have an obligation to treat others with respect, and vice versa. Others have rights because they have the obligation to treat me with respect. Like another example of this might be freedom of speech. Yes, I have the freedom of speech, but at the same time, I have an obligation to speak correctly, speak truthfully, speak respectfully. So, I can't yell bomb on a plane or fire in a public building because I don't have that right. I don't have the right to instill terror in the people around me. So yes, I have the freedom of speech, but at the same time, it comes with grave obligations to use my speech correctly. So it's kind of the same idea with, a woman's right to her body, that, she absolutely has the right to her body and her bodily integrity, absolutely. But at the same time, with that right comes a grave responsibility to use your body or use her body respectfully, to take care of her body, and her actions also come with obligations. So, and again, there is some sort of caveat here because when you're talking about rape, the woman's rights were not respected in any way in the case of rape that results in a pregnancy. But at the same time, I'm going to go back to that argument that I completely agree that the woman is violated, and this is a serious problem, and that this is not something that I take lightly. But at the same time, the fetus is paying for the crime that it did not commit when we are, essentially giving the fetus the death penalty for this crime. This disgusting crime, and like I said, I don't want to treat that lightly. It is severe. The absolute right to privacy, the decision between her and her doctor, I would absolutely agree that the woman and the doctor have a relationship that is private and should remain private. But at the same time, I don't know if you've heard me say this, and I know I've said it before, I don't know if you remember me saying this, but I have borrowed this from a professor here at the university, Dr. Rebard. Dr. Rebard likes to say that there are no private acts. That absolutely, that, I'm not going to get involved with the decision that you make with your doctor. But at the same time, there are no private acts in any society. And that which a society deems is appropriate, obviously will become legal, and then obviously will have greater effect. So it's not like this action ends with you and your doctor. This isn't just about you and your doctor. This particular action, though your conversation with your doctor is obviously private, and the interaction with your doctor is private, the action that you and your doctor are taking is absolutely not private. There are other people affected. One of the things that I like to ask when I'm talking about abortion is, how many fathers have been made aware of the abortion that's happening? And typically speaking, the woman does not tell the man what is, being decided. Obviously, that's not always true. Okay, I don't want to, blanket or generalize anyone. I want to make sure that I'm fair. But at the same time, I've known men who have found out that their girlfriends or, wives or whatever have committed abortions without telling them. And they're devastated. Now, I'm not talking about, one-night stands or anything like that. I'm talking about people in relationships where the woman decides that she doesn't want to get pregnant for whatever reason, or she doesn't want to be pregnant for whatever reason, and she takes it upon herself to make this decision because she believes that that this is just her fetus because it's her body. And I know this is kind of bringing us into the next argument about, men can leave a relationship with no consequences and women don't have that luxury. That's true. I agree that that's just not fair. That's biology. That's just the way that, women have been created, biologically speaking, or naturally speaking. And I think that men have a very grave responsibility to be respectful and with their sexuality and respect women. But at the same time, I think that goes both ways. I think that, women have the obligation to be forthcoming with the men in their lives and let men, if we're going to talk about a choice, I'm not saying that I agree with the choice, but at the same time, if we're going to talk about a choice for women, that we shouldn't strip that right away from men. That men just have just as much right to this fetus as a woman does, because a woman cannot create a fetus on her own. That it's not biologically possible. And I understand that I'm not popular for saying that. I get it. I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. the sad thing is I feel like only a woman can say something like that. That if a man tried to say that a man has a right to a fetus, he would be ostracized in this culture that we've created. But to me, it's quite emasculating to say that a man has no right to the fetus or the fatherhood, because it simply is not the case. Because women cannot create a fetus on their own, and that right belongs to a man as well. That this isn't a private act between the patient and the doctor, because the doctor didn't help you create the fetus. Your partner did. So really, this is not essentially a private act. This is an act that affects a wider group of people. And it also does affect the culture as a whole, because how are we treating life itself? How are we treating the creation of life? How are we treating a woman's fertility? I mean, we'll talk about this when we talk about sexuality. How are we treating a woman's fertility? Is it a problem? Is it a disease? Or is it a gift, something that we should appreciate and have an obligation to appreciate because of human nature, because of the nature of woman, that sort of thing. I'm going to go back to when I get into the man can leave a relationship with no consequences in number 9. I want to return to the discussion of the responsibility that both men and women have regarding their sexuality. That a woman has a responsibility to be intentional about her sexuality, and so does a man. That it's not all the obligation doesn't fall on just the woman. It's both parties. I read an interesting article not that long ago about if a woman decides that she doesn't want her child, she is a champion of women's rights. If a man decides that he doesn't want his child, he's a deadbeat. Say that again. I will say that again. If a woman decides, this is an article that I read, if a woman decides that she does not want her child, she is a champion for women's rights. If a man decides that he doesn't want his child, he's a deadbeat. He goes to prison, you've got to pay child support, you can sue him, all of these things. It's very odd that it's so one-sided and that we're focusing so heavily on what the woman wants. I know it's hard. I know what I'm saying is harsh. I understand this, but at the same time, we have both men and women have this obligation that, like I said, I'm going back to, human life is an obligation. We have a purpose in nature that we did not create. We have an obligation to live up to that, to live rationally, intelligently, intentionally. Number 10, the abortion to be allowed in cases of rape. I believe that I've covered that extensively. I am not pretending that what I'm saying is easy. I understand that, but I'm also going to go back to the argument that a fetus should not pay for the crime of the father. We do not apply that logic in any other situation. That there's no reason why the logic should fail, that the logic of crime, you pay for your own crime, there's no reason why that logic should fail simply because of the location of the fetus, if that makes sense. The last two that I've added, number 11, a woman's life is less free if her choice is removed, and number 12, a woman's life may be ruined if she carries the fetus to full term. Less free is problematic for me because the existence of choice does not necessarily make me free. I know that we've covered freedom and virtue and things like that, and I've spent time covering, whether or not, how free are we if we are not virtuous people? If we're ruled by our instincts and ruled by our emotions, how free are we? And I'm going to go back to the example of anger that I used in class. If someone comes to me and makes me extremely angry, and I have no choice but to respond out of the anger that I feel, so if I hit someone, or I say something nasty, or I call them a name, or I'm not really free in that moment. My freedom has actually been removed by my inability to control my anger. So we've already established that choice is not the existence of freedom. That freedom itself is actually being able to make an intelligent, rational decision despite your emotions, despite your fear, despite your anger, despite your frustration. Same thing here with a woman's life as being less free if the choice is removed. I'm going to go back and argue that your freedom, you removed your own freedom to make this decision concerning the abortion when you decided to have sex. Now, I know that logic does not follow if we're talking about a rape. Obviously, that is a completely different argument. And so a woman obviously does not have the choice in the case of a rape. But when she makes the decision to to engage in consensual sexual activity, she has made her choice. That she was free to make a sexual decision. So, if we say something, like abortion ethically should not be allowed or whatever, if we make that statement, we're not removing a woman's choice. The choice was there to have sex. And number 12, a woman's life may be ruined. She carries the fetus to full term. I think that one may be the most difficult argument that I've encountered, especially because I've spoken to a lot of college students who've told me things like, I have an athletic scholarship, I have a volleyball, whatever scholarship I have, volleyball, softball, rugby, I have this scholarship, and if I get pregnant, I'll lose it. And I just can't afford that. I won't be able to go to college. What's going to happen with my job? Like, how am I going to live? All of these things. And to me, that one's the one that gives me the most struggle because I can see that fear. I can see that that great concern and that struggle there. I'm going to go back to the choice that you made to engage in sexual activity and things like that. But I don't want to just keep putting this on the woman who makes the decision. I also want to put this on, the culture as a whole, and just say, maybe we need to be much more understanding and helpful of people who find themselves in these sorts of situations. Maybe people wouldn't be so afraid to get pregnant if they knew that their scholarship, would be put on hold. Like, let's say I'm at a Catholic university, and I have no idea if this has ever happened at UST here. I have no idea, so this is not about UST. But let's pretend, that I'm at a Catholic university, I'm a student, and I have an athletic scholarship, and I find myself pregnant. And I'm terrified that I, am going to lose my scholarship. For me, it would be amazing to see the university decide as a whole, look, we're not going to pay you right now your scholarship because you can't play the sport that you need to play, that you're here to play, but we'll put it on hold, and after let's say 9 months, and that 2 months after that, so after about 11 months, we'll reinstate your scholarship. You can come back and play for us. I don't see the issue with that. Putting someone's scholarship on hold, and I've seen Catholic businesses do something very similar with situations like, this woman is pregnant, she's not married, and it's not really something that we want to, we don't want to make a big issue out of it. So what we'll do is, you can take a leave of absence and then come back later, and we'll still pay you. And we'll still pay you for your leave of absence, that sort of thing. I've seen Catholic businesses do that. I've seen other Catholic schools do that with students who get pregnant, or unmarried people, women who get pregnant in Catholic and Christian institutions. I've seen them say, look, we'll put you on a leave of absence, but at the same time, we'll still pay you because we want you to not feel like this is such a burden. We want to help you. So I don't really want to keep putting all of this on the woman and her choice, because sometimes we just make mistakes, or we make choices that we don't, that aren't really ideal. So I think that there is an obligation that we have as a culture to help people and make this decision. So that way it's not such a burden, and it's not so difficult for women, depending on the situation that you're in. And as one last philosophical argument that I like to make regarding the life of the fetus is one of Aristotle's teleology. I personally have not known of any other philosophers to apply Aristotle's teleology here, specifically to abortion, but I'm sure other people have done it. I'm sure I am not the only one to have this novel idea. But I can remember reading Aristotle's Physics as an undergraduate and then as a graduate, and thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this is so interesting. Aristotle, I'm going back to the teleology of Aristotle, and you should know this, we've talked about this already. Aristotle's telos, or a study of the end, applies to really everything in nature, everything that exists. Everything that exists acts for an end. So Aristotle argues that there really are no coincidences in nature. Now, I'm not trying to make any sort of argument about intelligent design here. Aristotle was a pagan. He was not a Christian. He was not talking about, intelligent design or creationism or anything like that. He's not talking about that. When he's talking about an end, he's talking about goal-oriented, a goal-oriented creature. So the goal of every creature obviously is life. With human beings, obviously, the end of human life or the goal of human life is happiness for Aristotle. Virtue, this should sound familiar. But I mean, I'm going to make this quite simple and, even elementary. But if you look at things like a cat, everything that exists, the way that it functions, its claws, its teeth, even the little grooves on the tongue, like the little, the little hairs on the tongue, everything that exists in this creature has a purpose. So there really aren't any coincidences. The claws exist for a reason, the fur exists for a reason, the fur even has multiple, if you've ever owned a cat like I do, a very furry cat, then you know that they have different coats. So they shed heavily in the spring, March, so right around this time, and then they shed heavily in October, November, because they get in different coats, and one coat is heavy, and coarse, the other coat is really light and thin. I mean, you know why. I mean, there's no coincidence there that, it's preparing the animal for spring and, summer and winter. The same thing with the teeth and the claws and the tongue. Everything that exists in this creature is for some sort of biological purpose. And what Aristotle says that I think is really interesting, emphasis on really interesting, is this quote down at the bottom where he says, when a series has a completion, all of the preceding steps, of the series are for that sake. So for the sake of that end. So when there's some sort of completion in a creature or some sort of activity that's happening in nature, everything that happens prior to the end happens for the sake of the end, to benefit the end. So I apply this to the fetus. So everything that happens in utero is for the sake of a fully functioning human being. Now, Aristotle had no way of knowing anything that happens in the womb. Okay, the developmental process or, being exposed to different types of nutrients and stress. What's really interesting is, the stress of the mother affects the fetus, even into later on in life, which is very interesting. What your mother does while you are in utero actually greatly affects you to a certain extent on a biological level. And I would argue that, this is so simple. Like I said, it's elementary. Okay, if you leave a fetus alone in the womb, it's not ever going to be anything other than a human being at some point. If you leave it alone, okay, and let it function on its own. I'm not ever going to accidentally give birth to a tadpole or a frog or an oak tree or any of those things. It's not an accident. I mean, it's not a coincidence. It's not there, as a coincidence. It's there, as a result of something that I have done, okay, biologically speaking. And also, everything that happens in utero is for the sake of a fully functioning human being. Therefore, the developmental stage in utero, in my opinion, applying Aristotle's teleology to this situation, so everything that happens in utero is for the sake of the end of a human being. Therefore, we must treat the developmental stage in utero just as we would treat a human being. Therefore, we must treat the fetus in utero as a fully functioning developmental process and inherently valuable. That we can't really say, look, you're not valuable until 10 minutes after you're born. We can't say you're not valuable until 2 years after you're born, or you're not valuable until you get your Social Security card in the mail. We can't say that. Either human beings are inherently valuable or they aren't. And if they are, then I would argue, using Aristotle's teleology, that even their developmental phases and stages are inherently valuable of themselves, including the development in utero. So really, philosophically speaking, it's difficult to make the case that a fetus can just be forcibly removed without any sort of ethical problem. And I know that that's harsh, but at the same time, when you apply the logic in other situations, I feel like applying the logic here is so difficult because it is so culturally charged. It's such a big issue, culturally speaking. And I feel like that's really why we have such a difficult time discussing this. Let's put it that way. We have a difficult time discussing this in our culture because it's so charged. But I really think that if you apply the logic correctly, that there really isn't. It's not hard for me, logically speaking or ethically speaking, when the logic is applied appropriately. Okay, now we get to the assignment. So I want this to be as simple as possible, something that I just want to gauge that you've heard what I've talked about, that you've read O'Keefe. And I also want to give you a chance to respond to me because it's very simple for me to give you a lecture to listen to and then not ever hear what you have to say about it. And I don't want to be that kind of teacher. So what I'm going to do is give you one of two options. So option number one, write out your points of contention that you've had with what I've said. I've made quite a few arguments very quickly, and if we had done this in the class setting, it would have been much more of a conversation rather than a lecture, as you know. So I want to give you the option to write out your points of contention. So it can be 1 point, 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, 5, 10, however many you disagree with. Send me the issues that you had with what I said. Okay, so that's your option number one. Send me your points of contention. Option number two is send me your points of agreement. If you agreed with something I said, rather than disagreed, then go ahead and write that. It could be 1 thing, 2 things, 3 things, and so forth. I just want to give you a chance, number one, obviously that I know you did this, that you listened and you read. And number two, I also want to give you a chance to disagree with me. I don't want this to be a one-sided conversation. I do promise that I will read what you send me. I guarantee you, I promise that I will always read what you write and send. So option number one, to send me your points of contention, or option number two, send me your points of agreement. You may also combine those. You can say, I agreed with this, but I didn't agree with that. I agreed with this, but I didn't agree with that. You can combine the two if you wish. Please email me on, via my St. Tom account, Bollock at sttom.edu. And this assignment will count as a quiz grade. So you should have had a reading quiz over this selection from O'Keefe, but because we cannot do that, this will count as your quiz grade. Hopefully this will be simple, okay? Please just turn this in. Obviously, by the end of the semester, I really don't have a due date. I'm not really concerned about heavy due dates, okay? Send this to me by the last day of class. Send this to me by the last day of class, okay? Thank you.